The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club, which may sometime be renamed if Formed abandons us, but we'll see. We'll try and carry on under one name or the other, but we are continuing our discussion of Chesterton's Orthodoxy. We covered 2 or 3 pages in the last episode. We're now in chapter 5, The Flag of the World. Joseph Pearce, who's a very perspicuous reader of Chesterton, nevertheless has nothing to comment on until page 76, which astounds me. But Vivian and I will definitely begin before that. Vivian, where would you like to start?
Well, I wanted to make sure we did not overlook on page 72 this discussion of the true patriot. He kind of explains who the true patriot and the true traitors are. Sometimes we think if you have a quibble or a criticism, you're not being loyal, but he actually explores this more deeply. Do you want to do something before?
Just one little sentence before on page 71, the new paragraph at the bottom. But this is a deep mistake in this alternative of the optimist and the pessimist, that is, different attitudes towards the world. I like it, I don't like it. The assumption is of a man criticizes the world as if you're house hunting. Wait a minute, we're already in the house. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yes, as if you were house hunting. That's right. And so in the middle of 72, he says that our attitude towards life can be better expressed in terms of a kind of military loyalty than in terms of criticism and approval. So he starts out talking about the differences between optimists and pessimists being the critics and optimists finding approval of everything. And he's saying, maybe that's the wrong comparison to make. So he goes to this military loyalty. My acceptance of the universe is not optimism. It is more like patriotism. It is a matter of primary loyalty. The world is not a lodging house at Brighton, which we are to leave because it is miserable. It is the fortress of our family with the flag flying on the turret. And the more miserable it is, the less we should leave it. The point is not that this world is too sad to love or too glad not to love. The point is that when you do love a thing, its gladness is a reason for loving it, and its sadness is a reason for loving it more.
Very good.
Then Father had alluded to this on page 73 just before we started this recording. The bottom of the top.
On this, though I am insensitive, I might want to comment on what you've said, even though I haven't highlighted
please.
Myself. So this actually reminds me, and this discussion of patriotism, I think really sums it up. I can't remember where Chesterton said this, but he famously said that saying my country right or wrong is like saying my mother drunk or sober. And I think this is actually a reiteration of what he says here, that of course, if your mother's drunk, you still love her. You don't stop loving your mother because she's drunk. But what you do is you love her more, and you love her more by trying to get her to recover from her drunkenness. What you certainly don't do is get drunk with her, right? Because that's not going to help her at all. So, but again, that's the whole point, is that that the fact that we love our country does not mean that we will say our country right or wrong, because then we can do all sorts of evil and wicked things because of so-called patriotism. And so that's the whole point. It's because we love, in the sense that we love our mother or our motherland, not in the sense that we have a blind loyalty to some sort of amorphous institution.
Right. Well, he develops this loyalty that he's talking about a little more on page 74. If I may go there next, he's saying, the top of the page, what is the matter with the pessimist? I think it can be stated by saying that he is the cosmic anti-patriot. And what is the matter with the anti-patriot? I think it can be stated without undue bitterness by saying that he is the candid friend. And what is the matter with the candid friend? There we strike the rock of real life and immutable human nature. I venture to say that what is bad in the candid friend is simply that he is not candid. He is keeping something back, his own gloomy pleasure in saying unpleasant things. He has a secret desire to hurt, not merely to help. That is certainly, I think, what makes a certain sort of anti-patriot irritating to healthy citizens. And you go back a little longer, and he says, further down, he says, he is the traitor is the uncandid, candid friend, the man who says, I'm sorry to say we are ruined, and is not sorry at all. And he may be said without rhetoric to be a traitor, for he is using that ugly knowledge which was allowed him to strengthen the army to discourage people from joining it. And so back to the drunken mother, yes, we love her, drunk or no, and we don't go around talking about mother being a drunk, taking pleasure in this defect. But because we love her, we try to help her overcome the defect, and we don't shame her for it, and so on, you know? And so I must have read these two sections on the Patriot and the Traitor several times. I just let those words sink in, because sometimes it's an act of loyalty to be truthful and to give constructive criticism. But if you don't love what you're criticizing, you are actually deliberately causing hurt. You might not realize that's what you're doing, but it is what you're doing.
Yeah. The one thing, this isn't a quibble, I hasten to add, but there's one sort of further thought. The fact that the candid, inverted commas probably, candid friend, who's not really candid, has a secret desire to hurt, not merely to help. I agree with that, but there's also a phrase which I think is helpful in understanding this sort of person. That's ethnomasochism. So, because this implies a desire to hurt, implies some sort of sadism, all right, a pleasure in inflicting pain on others. But I do think also, perhaps even more alarming, is an ethnomasochism. It's a self-loathing. It's a loathing of one's own roots, our own family, and a desire to do as much harm as we can to our family, not merely in a desire to hurt them, but in a desire to hurt ourselves. Right, because we self-loathing based upon we just don't like the family of which we find ourselves being a member.
That's a very key insight, and I think they go together. Actually, you know that the way to heal all of this is actually, once you realize how much God loves you and how merciful and kind and patient He is towards you. To now, the best way you can reciprocate that is to now start showing that same patience and mercy to the people around you. And it's not easy. Right. But you're right, you know, then you go back to this flagellating them and flagellating yourself. And it's not, and I'm not saying don't try to make headway and don't try to make progress and don't try to help one another go higher, you know, but there's this other thing, you're right, Joseph, where we're sort of ashamed. We're ashamed of our family or ashamed of our past or ashamed. And that does not lead in a healthy direction.
No.
That's quite interesting, because that particular malady is pretty widespread right now about the history of our country.
Yes. It is.
Yeah.
It is. And you know,
is wokeism. Wokeism is a manifestation of ethnomasochism.
It really is. And, you know, it's actually a sign of despair and hopelessness, because, you know, why love something toward improvement if improvement is impossible? You know, so you have to have hope that we are getting somewhere. We are going somewhere. God's leading us forward, onward and upward. And so it's worth it to keep trying. And
that's right. But it doesn't mean the country is going to survive or flourish. But the cosmos will survive. And the point is, he wants to have a cosmic patriotism, not necessarily a national patriotism. He's not opposed to that. He thinks he's a patriot. But the point is, we can't be assured that the future of our country will be a happy ending. We can't be assured that the future of the cosmos will be a happy ending.
Right. And while that's true, I would have to just add that the reason, quibble squared, the reason for loving your country is the same reason for loving your home, is the same reason for loving your family. And it's not the jingoism, or, you talked about ethno-sadism. We also know there's machoism or whatever. I don't know. I can't think of the right word, but where you're going to go and flick paint on other people because you're just so superior and everybody should be like you. You're right. But
we could call that, right?
Yeah, but the point is that for the reason, Thomas Aquinas said, you cannot love your parents enough because they gave you life. And patriotism is the same thing. You cannot love your home, your country enough, because without them, you wouldn't have a life. So love of country is not because you're the best country in the world, or love of your parents isn't because they're the best parents in the world. It's simply because I need to live somewhere, and I wouldn't live and wouldn't have a place to live if I didn't have a family, a home, and a country. And so we try to make it better.
Yeah, if I could quibble a little bit as well, and I speak here as an Englishman, that my country has changed beyond recognition in almost my lifetime. And the point is that my father sort of treated almost England as a god. That as something to be idolized, as something just permanent and perennial and unchanging and immutable. And the fact is, our countries are not unchanging and immutable. They do change, and they can change for the worse, and they can change to such a degree that they would be unrecognizable to our parents and grandparents. And at some point, when is your country not the thing that it was? So whereas God is always something which someone who is unchanging and therefore reliable, immutable, we cannot say that of any country, and so therefore to idolize our countries as something permanent and perennial, I think is dangerous. It's idolatry ultimately. We should love our country for the reason that Chesterton says, the reason that you've said also, Vivian, because it's our family, right? And we should love our family, and we love our family as they are now. We love our parents. We can love our great grandparents, but only in some sort of abstract sense. We can't really love our great grandchildren because you don't know who they're going to be. And so, I think that's the whole point, is that we mustn't see something which is transient and mutable, such as our countries, as something which are immutable and unchanging, because it's not
right,
true.
Which is what Father's point was. That's right. That loving something has nothing to do. Real love is not idolatry. In fact, idolatry is actually self-love. It's not it. So
explain that.
Well, when men fashion idols, what do they make? They make things of their own making, their own imagination, their own images of themselves. Often they're idealized people-looking things. Sometimes they're animals, whatever. But the point is that if I'm creating it and now worshiping it, I'm worshiping myself.
But what about you worshiping idols that have been passed down for generations? You've inherited the idol. You haven't made it yourself.
Well, that's a good question, and I must say I haven't thought of it that way. I haven't asked myself that question, but then what you're realizing you have is, well, I worship as my parents did because what we do is the right way to do things. And so now you've got this kind of idolatrous loyalty that you see. So it's still in the end a kind of self-love. So
I could have killed or been killed for my country when I was a teenager because of the idolatrous understanding of what I inherited from my father. That's the fact.
And that's so we need to realize there are always these dangers on either side of the thing that we're trying to get at, whether it's love, whether it's love of country, love of family, love of children. You can idolize,
yes,
your own children, setting up shrines for your own children. Oh, Johnny's just so perfect.
The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis is all about this idolizing of children. Yeah,
you can idolize mother love. Any love can become a corruption of the thing it's supposed to be. And the whole journey of life on earth as a Christian is, in fact, the purification of your loves. That's basically what we're undergoing in this life, is a purification of our loves. And so love of country has to be purified too. love of even parents or children has to be purified too.
And the purification is to purge it of pride. That's always
and vanity.
Everything is poisoned by pride. Everything
and
is
vanity.
Poisoned by pride. All
yes.
Poisoned by pride. Yeah.
Yes, and so, unfortunately, as the great Saint Teresa said, God loves us too much to leave us as we are. And in a way, when we are loyally critical, it's that same sort of divine love where I love you too much to not say anything about this self-destructive thing you are doing, right? That's loyal criticism, or we call it constructive criticism. But where you actually are criticizing to inflict pain and shame, and what is that? Where's that coming from?
More fun.
More fun.
I want to put in a word for idolaters and idolatry.
Okay.
Because we're in the Christmas season now as we're recording this, and of course the readings are from Isaiah. And you're always reading the Psalms as a Catholic, especially as a priest. And, the idols of silver and gold, they can't hear, they can't see, they make them from their own gold, and they have to carry them around, But I'm thinking about, who are these people that made these gold idols? I mean, prior to Revelation what were they doing? Somehow they had some sense of something bigger than themselves. The world is more than they are. There's something transcendent. They want to worship something. They want to offer themselves, but there's nothing there. So, let's take something. Gold is precious. Let's take some gold and take it out of the marketplace. We're not going to buy and sell anymore. We're going to make a calf out of that, or a little, I don't know, an eagle. And then, we're going to worship that. I think that the motivation behind idolatry was probably, in a lot of cases, a very good motivation.
Yeah, Father, can I comment upon that? Because I agree with you. I just finished teaching a course for Homeschool Connections. It's a high school level course for Catholic homeschoolers on classical epic and tragedy. And one of the students in my class was absolutely insistent that the pagan gods were all demons. And the reason he's giving that is, of course, because some of the fathers of the church, that's what they called them, right? And I said, yes, but this is after divine revelation, after the incarnation, right? If you persist in worshiping pagan gods after Jesus Christ has been revealed to you, then you're worshiping demons. You're not worshiping the true God. You're worshiping something false and dangerous and evil, therefore demonic. But prior to the coming of Christ, when you're looking for him, when you're searching for him, so you can't treat the pagan gods of Homer, of Sophocles, of Aristotle and Plato the same way that those who are insisting on remaining pagans after the coming of Christ. And if you can't see the difference, then you're not actually understanding what's happening here. And I think that's basically echoing exactly what you've just said.
Well, to Father's point and your point too, God did make us to worship. So there is this impetus, and that's a good thing that he's planted in our hearts to want to worship, to give gratitude to something, to acknowledge something greater than ourselves. So that God has planted that is in us is a good thing. The impetus is a good thing. But look how easily it can run amok. And even take human sacrifice. Well, you can realize that the people who practiced human sacrifices in pagan religions must have had some acknowledgement that, what's the greatest thing of all? Life itself. So if I'm going to offer God the greatest thing of all, wouldn't I offer God human life?
Someone else's.
But not mine.
Yeah.
And so now you see how quickly the thing, that was planted in our hearts, but look at how that can go really bad. Really, exactly. Really okay. Yeah. So I think it's okay to acknowledge that God is the one who made us to worship. The impetus to worship is there.
The devil perverts. The devil can't create anything. He can only pervert that which is already there. So that's exactly what you see happening when when the healthy desire to seek God and to worship Him becomes the sacrifice of children, human sacrifice. That's exactly where the diabolicals got involved and has perverted and distorted that noble thing to want to worship God into the fact what you're really doing is worshiping the demonic. Because the devil's got you to do absolutely abominable things in the name of God.
And I would bring it back to self-worship at the same time, because one of the greatest insights I ever read was Joseph Pieper in his essay, The Philosophical Act. And he said, here's the difference between true worship and false worship. True worship is when you discover God, truth, being, something outside of yourself, greater than yourself, and now you wish to conform yourself to him. False worship is when you're trying to manipulate the forces that be to do your will. So the one is the truest act of worship is doing the will of God. And false worship is trying to get God to do my will. And so when idol worship or even human sacrifice or witchcraft or all these things, what are these people doing? They're trying to get something. They're trying to appease the gods in order to at least turn away their wrath, but give them a good harvest or give them this or give them that or and now this actually becomes I'm trying to manipulate to get what I want. And so that's how worship becomes debased.
Can I use what you've said there as a springboard to controversy? I'm agreeing with you, by the way. The controversy is just leaping from where you were. From one of the big questions I like asking people: who is worse, the modernist theologian who endeavors to manipulate doctrine in his own image, or the serial fornicator who knows the truth and yet, for whatever reason, perhaps just weakness at best, doesn't do it?
Does he love all those women?
Almost
I'm being cheeky.
I think we're talking about physical pleasure rather than love in any meaningful sense here. But the point is, who's worse, the serial fornicator or the modernist theologian who basically tries to make the teachings of the church in their own image?
Well, it's an important question. They're probably the same person, however. Because, I mean, one of them, I don't agree with E. Mafflin Jones on a lot of things. We published 3 of his books on this, but he did have an insight, which I think had a lot of truth to it, that these people were trying to manipulate the teachings of the church. It's because they've got these depraved moral lives and they can't live with themselves. They can't bring any conformity with the church's teaching, so they got to change the church's teaching.
And I would go even further and say that if you look in the Old Testament, idolatry and sexual infidelity always go together, always. And so
in fact, they express it. They express idolatry as sexual infidelity
because they go together. They go together. So fidelity to God, which means, well, like Chesterton said, are you going to have the humility to accept limits? And so when we start to see this kind of not accepting of limits, not wanting to obey the will of God, especially in the sexual realm, because that's probably one of the greatest urges that's hard to control. Infidelity in the people of God to God always was linked with sexual infidelity.
Very good. Very good.
I want to go back to a couple of things. One, just a very minor comment, Joseph. You talked about idolatry after Christ, but I would say even before Christ, outside of Israel, because it was God's revelation to Israel that began to form a people who believed in the one God they could worship properly, not themselves, a transcendent God. But there were people outside Israel at that time who didn't have the revelation, and it was, again, just like our motives are mixed, our love is mixed, our worship is mixed.
Yep.
Theirs was too. I mean, and Chesterton brings this out in the gods of Greece and the gods of Rome, the difference that was there, and then the gods of Carthage. And also, there's someplace in Everlasting Memory talks about the gesture that was made before the idol was noble, but the idol was ignoble. That was
Right.
the thing. And then go back here.
I agree with you completely, Father. But I think the way of expressing it perhaps might be that that the Gentile idolatry was a quest for God, pre Christ.
Yeah.
Gentile idolatry was a quest for God, whereas Jewish idolatry was heresy, right? Because you're actually denying the one God and choosing instead to worship an idol. So if you're part of the chosen people, you're part of Judaism, and you become an idolater, you're a heretic. And I think that's the difference. But you can't accuse the Greeks, the Gentiles, of being heretics. They don't know about the true God, right?
Right.
And a line of thought which we won't pursue here, but I want to just mention it based on what you were saying, Vivian, about idolatrous manipulation to get what you want, which is also what magic was intended to do.
Yes, and witchcraft.
Both Chesterton and Lewis and Tolkien saw a line between magic, idolatry, and modern science.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. By the way, the root word for witchcraft, which is Wicca, means to bend.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bending things to make them what you want them to be.
And then back further, even to our conversation about patriotism in our country. I was always, part of my priesthood was being thankful for being here and having a roof over my head and having food and having education that most people didn't have, But what can I give back? But I just recently read this book by a woman named Leslie O'Rourke called Regime Change. And all the documents are unclassified. Between 1947 and 1999, which is 42 years, the United States, mainly the CIA, attempted in 64 cases regime change. We tried to change the regime in 64 countries, sometimes by assassination, sometimes by, iniquitous ways. And I'm ashamed of that. I see a partial explanation. We want to prevent communism spreading, but I'm ashamed that my country, which I love, engaged in this iniquitous behavior. I would call it heinous behavior in many cases to destroy other governments. But does that mean I leave America? Or I don't. What it means is that I want to stop that. Yeah. I want to do what I can to overcome that, to restore what's good in this country and prevent what's bad from prevailing. And I think, it's possible to happen.
I mean, that a huge part of my conversion, Father, was my conversion before I became a convert to Catholicism. It was connected to my love of Chesterton and Belloc. My conversion from being a great Britisher to being a little Englander, right? That I love my country for the fact it was small and beautiful, not because it was great and had political power around the world. And I think that unless we love the United States as something which is small and beautiful, and not something which is big and powerful, then we're not loving it, because we're actually wanting it to be something which is not good.
Well, being big and powerful is not bad. God is big and powerful.
But God's God. God's love. But we're not, right? No nation, no. And the point is, the difference between, to me, nationalism is not imperialism. Imperialism is internationalism. Imperialism is where one nation imposes its will upon other nations against their will, right? That's internationalism, right? And so the nationalism, it says, look, we just want our country to be good, true, and beautiful, and we will protect our country from people that try to invade us or stop us from being good, true, and beautiful, but we're not interested in telling you what to do, as long as you're not.
I know, but I've been to India several times and to Africa once, and the fact that I can speak to them in a common language, they've got roads and highways in the railway system. Right? England brought them that. Africa is how many? 1,000 dialects, no common language. England, France, some like in Germany, but England and France brought them a language and culture. There was a lot of benefits to these countries.
Well,
I think.
this is a tricky question. Roy Campbell, he spoke the Zulu language, translated into English a Zulu song, which is absolutely beautiful. These people had a very, very good culture, but it was not literal. They didn't write it. It was just spoken. Of course, the danger of that is so fragile; it could be lost within a generation, and it was, right? But that doesn't mean that it did not have an absolutely beautiful culture, which the storytelling, verbal storytelling, being passed off one person to the other. The fact that no one wrote it down meant it could just be obliterated and become oblivious, within a generation, and that's what's happened. But I think we should not look upon Africa as sort of being nothing but dark and ignorant before.
No, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that. I'm saying, but they would have these very divided, isolated cultures that couldn't communicate because there was no common language.
Same thing in Switzerland. My dear friend from Switzerland said that prior to the three major languages, German, Italian, and French, becoming the languages of the three cantons, she said there were hundreds of languages in Switzerland. Every valley had its own language. The one valley over here couldn't communicate with the people in the valley over there. And she said that when the canton system was developed and the main language groups were decided upon or whatever, that it was actually illegal to continue to pass on those dialects in the little schoolhouses or little village schools or whatever.
Very tricky because the British did exactly the same thing with Welsh. This little small country on the edge of England, right? That's always been dominated by England, and they've got their own language, which is I don't speak it, which is apparently very beautiful. And there was an absolute effort to stamp it out and make it illegal to teach it or to speak it. And thanks be to God, in my judgment, there was resistance to that, and the Welsh language, because the Welsh language and the Welsh culture and the Welsh nation are inseparable, right? You destroy the language, you destroy the culture, you destroy the people, you destroy the nation. So, I mean, this is very we're going in all sorts of directions here. But
the reason why I brought up Switzerland as an example is because people often would never think of that place of having had tribal societies with everyone with his own language. I mean, we think of Africa, all these places, and the fact of the matter is that even so some of these developments. Now, it wasn't illegal to speak the language to your children, but they could not. It could not be written, and it could not be taught in any formal way. But the point is that this kind of, I'm just trying to say.
Yeah, I'm a localist.
Switzerland is hardly a place that we think of as a place that suffered from imperial expansion, these people coming in, pushing people around and ruining their cultures. And I'm just saying,
they did it themselves.
Yeah, they did it themselves, by the way, for the sake of having peace, because they were all at war with each other.
Yeah, I agree with you. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that the individual nations of God are like flowers in the garden. Individual nations of the world are like flowers in the garden of God. Right? The individual nations are each unique and beautiful for their uniqueness. And what we don't want is a monoculture, where we're all speaking very bad global English with a very bad global culture. We don't want that. We want this flourishing of individual, unique localities, cultures, nations.
Right.
But now
I'm going to bring Quibble cubed, which is that things don't stay static. Things don't stay static. Things are constantly like a living organism. These cells get shed and new cells grow, and things are living, changing organisms. And so even that idea of, all the flowers in the garden or whatever. Well, guess what? The flowers in the garden aren't the same that they were thousands of years ago either.
Right.
Because
they've changed much more quickly recently by our own manipulation. But
I know, but I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the natural processes of
the key thing is ultimately there are two forces at work: the forces of centralization towards globalism and internationalism and cosmopolitanism, and the forces of decentralization towards localism. And yes, things change. It's what side are we on, right? Do we resist the bad change in order to preserve or conserve or restore the good, right? And that's localism. That's decentralization of power, subsidiarity, if you like. And it's subsidiarity in the name of solidarity, because a one world global dystopia is what we want to avoid.
Well, I hardly think of Switzerland as being part of a one world global dystopia.
I was not criticizing.
No, but I'm saying they got the system they got because they were all killing each other through constant warfare.
Listen, I'm not going to use the fact that your example of Switzerland to negate what I've just said.
Yeah, good.
All right. Well, I won't have the last word.
Go ahead.
We're going to conclude here, but you can quibble after it, though. But I mean, I'm a little Englander too. I mean, in that sense. But I also see there were great benefits to colonialism for the world that we're still, reaping the fruits of, and there were evils as well. But it wasn't a total wrong. No. It's like I'm opposed to globalization too, and the one world order and the World Economic Forum, and yet exchange between different countries and trade and cultural exchanges, all this is wonderful. So
absolutely,
we will, after going 3 more pages, we'll be back next session. Don't miss it.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.